In the depths of ancient texts, among dusty parchments and forgotten manuscripts, there is a story that few have dared to tell in full. It is the narrative of a celestial being who, driven by passion or rebellion, decided to share with humanity secrets that should remain hidden. This being is Azazel, a fallen angel whose story spans millennia and cultures, leaving a trail of fascination, fear, and enigmas wherever he goes. What happens when divine knowledge falls into human hands? When the veils between worlds are torn and heavenly mysteries become earthly tools? Azazel's story is not just about a cosmic rebel, but about humanity's own awakening to powers that have transformed our existence. What do we really know about this angel who defied the heavens to illuminate or condemn the human path? In the apocryphal scriptures of the Book of Enoch, a text revered by Ethiopians and preserved throughout the centuries, Azazel emerges as a figure of immense complexity. His name, which in Hebrew can be translated as strength of God or God strengthens, carries a deep irony considering his fate. Unlike many supernatural entities mentioned only in passing in sacred texts, Azazel has a detailed history and an identity of his own that resonates through the millennia. Before his fall, Azazel belonged to the Watchers, also called the Grigori, a select group of angels whose divine purpose was to observe human creation without directly interfering. These celestial beings possessed incomparable wisdom and dwelt on higher planes, contemplating the development of young humanity. They were not archangels like Michael or Gabriel, but held a special position in the divine hierarchy, silent guardians charged only with bearing witness. The turning point in Azazel's existence occurred approximately 3,000 years before the Common Era, when he and 200 other Watchers were attracted by the beauty of the daughters of men. What began as admiration turned into desire and finally into transgression. Led by Samayaza, the Watchers made a pact with each other on Mount Hermon, swearing that they would descend to Earth to take these women as wives. This pact marked an unprecedented cosmic rupture. The Watchers, ethereal creatures, took on physical form and united with human women, begetting children who were called Nephilim, giants with extraordinary strength who, according to the texts, devoured everything that the work of men produced. But unlike the other fallen angels, Azazel would not be remembered only for this transgression, but for something much more significant. While his heavenly brethren were content to satisfy their carnal desires, Azazel went further. His fascination with humanity was not merely physical. He observed the dormant potential of human beings and saw in them a spark that could be nurtured. Was this genuine compassion or just a deeper form of rebellion? The ancient texts do not offer us clarity about his initial motivations. In passages from the Book of Enoch, particularly in the 8th chapter, Azazel is described not just as a transgressor, but as a teacher. He takes on the role of instructor of mankind, passing on knowledge that was forbidden to mortals. This transfer of forbidden wisdom would forever mark his legacy and set him apart from the other angels who simply fell out of lust. The figure of Azazel presents us with a fascinating paradox. A celestial being who, in breaking with the divine, drew closer to the human, not through simple desires, but through the transmission of knowledge. Could this be the first Prometheus in religious history? The one who steals fire from the gods to give it to mortals? Scholars of Kabbalah and medieval angelology often associate Azazel with the constellation of Capricorn, linking him to celestial secrets and knowledge of the stars. Other esoteric texts position him as the guardian of the abyss, the one who knows the paths between worlds. These later associations only reinforce his role as a mediator between realities, as a liminal being who inhabits the boundaries between the divine and the human. In ancient iconography, Azazel is often depicted with wings similar to those of a raven or eagle, symbolizing both his celestial origin and his ability to cross great distances with his knowledge. Some manuscripts also depict him with multiple eyes, suggesting his ability to see beyond the veils of ordinary reality and penetrate the cosmic mysteries that he would later reveal to humanity. What fascinates us about Azazel is not just his rebelliousness, but the specific type of transgression he represents. In a world where knowledge was controlled and hierarchical, he chose to democratize forbidden knowledge. But what exactly was this knowledge that provoked such divine wrath? What did Azazel teach that was considered so dangerous to humanity in its early days? Among all the knowledge imparted by Azazel, metallurgy occupied a central position. According to the Book of Enoch, he taught men to make swords, knives, shields, breast armor, and showed them the metals of the earth and the art of working them. This transfer of knowledge represented an unprecedented technological revolution for primitive humanity. Previously limited to stone and wooden tools, humans were now able to forge metal, extracting it from the earth and transforming it into instruments of unparalleled power. Metallurgy was not just a technique. It was an alchemical process that symbolized transformation. Metals, hidden in the bowels of the earth in crude forms, could be purified by fire and shaped by human will. This metaphor of transformation and refinement would cross the centuries to become central to several later esoteric traditions. Azazel didn't just teach techniques. He introduced a paradigm of transformation that would be fundamental to human spiritual development. Another field of knowledge transmitted was that of cosmetics and personal adornment. He taught men how to make bracelets and ornaments, and he taught women the art of painting their eyebrows and embellishing their eyelashes, and of using the most precious stones and all kinds of dyes. This seemingly trivial passage reveals something profound. Azazel introduced humanity not just to practical tools, but to aesthetics, to constructed beauty, and to the power of appearance as an expression of identity. Ornaments and cosmetics represented more than vanity. They were extensions of the power of self-transformation. Gemstones, with their specific energetic properties, allowed men and women to channel cosmic energies. The adornments were not just decorative, but ritual. Each bracelet, each pendant, each piece of makeup established a connection between the human body and superhuman forces. Through ornaments, Azazel taught humanity how to embody the divine through material symbols. Perhaps the most controversial of his teachings was his knowledge of incantations and spells. He taught the course of the stars and the movement of the moon, and how men can disturb the elements. This transfer of celestial magic into human hands represented a democratization of supernatural power. What had previously been a divine prerogative was now available to mortals. The ability to influence realities through words of power and specific rituals. The astrology transmitted by Azazel was not just contemplative, but practical. He taught how celestial cycles influence terrestrial ones, how the patterns of the stars revealed destinies and opportunities, and how humans could synchronize their actions with cosmic rhythms to significantly increase their effectiveness. This synchronization between microcosm and macrocosm would become fundamental to all subsequent magical traditions. The legacy of Azazel's teachings can be traced back through ancient esoteric traditions such as Sumerian magical practices, Egyptian theurgy, and the Greek Eleusinian mysteries. Texts such as the Sefer Raziel HaMalak, Book of Raziel the Angel, attributed to another teaching angel but containing elements similar to Azazel's teachings, have preserved aspects of these forbidden transmissions throughout the millennia, surviving in medieval manuscripts that circulated in restricted Kabbalistic circles. Particularly fascinating is the botanical knowledge transmitted, mentioned in passing in the texts, but widely developed in oral traditions, the properties of roots and trees. Azazel taught how to identify plants with healing, poisonous, and visionary properties. Knowledge of power plants, which altered consciousness and allowed communication with non-physical planes, represented a key to transcendent experiences previously inaccessible to mortals. Was there a greater plan behind this transfer of knowledge? Some contemporary scholars, such as anthropologist Jeremy Narby, suggest that these teaching angels could represent a deliberate acceleration of human evolution, an intervention calculated to raise the consciousness of the species beyond its natural limits. If so, Azazel would not just be a rebel, but part of a wider cosmic project of human development. However, according to traditional narratives, this knowledge was not destined for humanity at that point in its evolution. Like a child who is given powerful tools before developing the necessary maturity to use them wisely, humanity quickly began to apply this knowledge not only for creation, but also for destruction. The same swords that could defend could kill. The same incantations that could heal could curse. As with any process of artificially accelerated development, the consequences were catastrophic. The text of Enoch itself describes that there was great wickedness and much fornication, and they were corrupt in all their ways. The premature transfer of this knowledge, without the corresponding moral development, triggered an imbalance that would require cosmic intervention. What price would Azazel pay for this reckless generosity or calculated rebellion? The cry of humanity corrupted by forbidden knowledge rose to the heavens. According to the Book of Enoch, Michael, Uriel, Raphael, and Gabriel looked down from heaven and saw the much blood that was shed on the earth, and all the iniquity that was practiced on it. The transgression that initially seemed restricted to the personal level of the angels and their human wives had become a cosmic crisis, threatening the very divine plan for creation. Faced with this corruption, the archangels interceded with the divine throne. The spirits of the souls of men who have died cry out, and their lament has reached the gates of heaven. This passage reveals an even more disturbing dimension. It wasn't just the future of humanity that was at stake, but also the fate of disembodied souls, disturbed by the imbalance introduced onto the earthly plane by forbidden knowledge. Divine judgment was not long in coming. In the original text, God commands the archangel Raphael, "Bind Azazel hand and foot, and cast him into darkness." This sentence marks the beginning of an elaborate and symbolic punishment, not only for Azazel, but for all the watchers who took part in the original transgression. While his companions received varying punishments, Azazel's condemnation was particularly severe due to the nature and scope of his teachings. The place chosen for imprisonment was not arbitrary. Make an opening in the desert of Dudiel and cast him there. Dudiel, often identified as a desolate region in the Judean desert, would become not only a physical prison, but a symbolic representation of cosmic isolation. The transmitter of knowledge would now be deprived of all contact, confined to a place where his knowledge could no longer reach human ears. The nature of the imprisonment reveals the seriousness of the transgression in the divine eyes. Cover him with sharp and rough stones, and cover him with darkness so that he may dwell there forever. Perpetual darkness would be the perfect antithesis to the one who brought forbidden enlightenment. The pointed stones symbolized the painful return to raw matter for the one who taught how to refine it and turn it into instruments of power. Even more significant is the temporal aspect of the punishment. Azazel would not be destroyed or reabsorbed into divinity. He would remain conscious, but isolated, until the end of time. On the day of the great judgment, he will be thrown into the fire. This final clause of the sentence suggests that even after millennia of isolation, there would still be a final reckoning, an ultimate purification through the transforming fire. Meanwhile, the giants born from the union between watchers and humans, the Nephilim, were condemned to turn against each other in fratricidal warfare. And when all their children have killed one another, and when they see the destruction of their beloved ones, bind them for 70 generations in the valleys of the earth, until the day of their judgment and consummation. In this way, the physical fruits of transgression would be eliminated from the earth, although the knowledge already passed on could not be completely eradicated. To understand the cosmic dimension of this punishment, it is necessary to put the original role of the Watchers into context. They were not merely passive observers, but guardians of a delicate balance between the divine and the human. Their function was to bear witness without interfering, preserving the autonomy of human development according to the original divine plan. The transgression was not just sensual, but ontological, a rupture in the very structure of creation. Particularly revealing is the divine monologue that precedes the punishment. The whole secret has not yet been revealed to you, that you have left the high and holy place to spend time with women and to defile yourself with the daughters of men, taking wives for yourself and acting like the sons of the earth, begetting giants as your sons. This passage suggests that there was even deeper knowledge that the Watchers possessed, cosmic secrets that, fortunately for humanity, remained hidden even after Azazel's transgression. The consequences of Azazel's punishment reverberated beyond the spiritual plane, symbolically manifesting in later religious practices that sought to restore the disturbed cosmic balance. This imprisonment in the desert, far from human civilization, would lay the foundations for one of the most enigmatic rituals in ancient Jewish tradition, a collective purification ceremony where Azazel's name would take on an entirely new and deeply symbolic meaning. The name Azazel reappears in a surprising way in Leviticus chapter 16, in a context apparently disconnected from his history as a fallen angel. There we find a detailed description of the ritual of Yom Kippur, Day of Atonement, the holiest ceremony in the ancient Jewish calendar. In this ritual, 2 goats were selected, one sacrificed as a sin offering in the temple, and the other, symbolically laden with the transgressions of the people, sent into the desert to Azazel. This second animal, popularly known as the scapegoat, a term that originated the expression still used today, had an extraordinary ritual function. The high priest would lay his hands on its head, confessing to it all the iniquities, transgressions, and sins of the people of Israel, symbolically placing them on the animal. The goat was then sent by a designated man to an isolated land, taking the collective impurity away from the community. The Hebrew expression in the original text is la Zazelle, which has generated centuries of debate among scholars. Was Azazel a place in the desert? A reference to an entity? A linguistic derivation of Azazel, goat that goes away? The option most consistent with ancient traditions points to a direct connection with the fallen angel, especially considering the parallel between the fate of the goat sent to an isolated land and Azazel himself imprisoned in the desert of Dudiel. The symbolic parallels are profound. Just as Azazel had borne the sins of humanity by introducing knowledge that it was not prepared to use wisely, now an animal ritualistically bore the sins of an entire community. Just as Azazel had been banished to the desert, so the goat was sent to desolate lands, establishing a spiritual geography where impurity and desert were symbolically connected. This ritual revealed a sophisticated understanding of the nature of collective guilt and the need for social purification. The community not only recognized its faults, but participated in a tangible process of transference and removal. The goat was not exactly a sacrifice, it was not ritually killed, but a symbolic transportation vehicle carrying the impurity outside the confines of the camp, returning it to the primordial chaos represented by the desert. In the later evolution of Jewish tradition, particularly in rabbinic texts such as the Talmud, the ritual is reinterpreted with additional layers of meaning. The Yoma Treaty describes how the goat was led in stages to a cliff, from where it was pushed. A scarlet thread was tied to it which, according to tradition, would turn white if the atonement was accepted. This transformation of color symbolized the passage from impurity to purity, from sin to forgiveness. While the original ritual was discontinued after the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 CE, its influence continued to reverberate through symbolic interpretations. Philon of Alexandria, a Hellenistic Jewish philosopher, interpreted the goat for Azazel as representing the evil that must be rejected from the soul, while the goat sacrificed in the temple represented the divine part of the human being. This psychological interpretation transformed a concrete ritual into an internal process of purification and alignment. In the early Christian tradition, particularly in the Epistle of Barnabas, the ritual is reinterpreted as a prefiguration of Jesus' sacrifice. The scapegoat becomes a prophetic symbol, connecting ancient Jewish practices to the new Christian theology of redemption. This appropriation and reinterpretation demonstrates how the symbolism associated with Azazel transcended specific religious traditions, taking on new meanings while preserving the essence of the transfer of guilt and purification. Modern analytical psychology, particularly in the work of Carl Jung, would recognize in this ritual a universal archetype of collective projection and purification. Human societies often identify scapegoats, individuals or groups onto whom they project dark aspects of their collective psyche. The Yom Kippur ritual offered a constructive and conscious channeling of this impulse, allowing the community to recognize its collective shadow and ritualistically separate it from its core identity. From transgressive angel to symbol of ritual purification, the transformation of Azazel's meaning through the sacred texts reveals how mythological figures evolve and take on symbolic functions beyond their original narratives. The transmitter of forbidden knowledge became part of a collective purification mechanism, demonstrating the complexity with which religious traditions incorporate and transform older elements. But how would this figure be interpreted in more recent times, when the very concept of forbidden knowledge would be radically transformed? With the emergence of modern occultism in the 19th century, Azazel experienced a remarkable resignification. In texts such as Jacques-Auguste Simon Colin de Planzy's Dictionnaire Infernal, 1818, and later in the Goetia, part of the grimoire known as Lemegeton or the Lesser Key of Solomon, Azazel no longer appears as a punished transgressor, but as an entity of power that could be summoned through specific rituals. This transformation reflects a paradigmatic shift in the relationship with esoteric knowledge. What was forbidden was now actively sought after. Aleister Crowley, perhaps the most influential occultist of the 20th century, identified Azazel with aspects of the Egyptian deity Thoth and the Greek Hermes, both patrons of knowledge, writing, and magic. In his interpretation, Azazel represented the transfer of divine knowledge to humanity not as a transgression, but as a necessary act for human spiritual evolution. This Crowleyan Azazel was an emancipator, not a corrupter, one who freed humanity from the limitations imposed by a possessive deity. In the magical traditions of the Golden Dawn and its offshoots, Azazel is often associated with the sphere of Bina on the Kabbalistic tree of life, the realm of higher understanding, where forms are crystallized from pure potentials. This association positions Azazel not as a simple rebel, but as a mediator between the abstract and the concrete, between potential and manifestation. His role becomes that of transforming pure knowledge into practical applications. Exactly what he did when he taught metallurgy, cosmetics, and magic to humans. The influence of Gnostic interpretations also significantly transformed the figure of Azazel. In some currents of modern Gnosticism, particularly those influenced by texts such as the Apocrypha of John, archons, cosmic rulers, are seen as entities that seek to keep humanity in ignorance. In this context, figures like Azazel, who bring forbidden knowledge, are reinterpreted as liberators who challenge the archontic tyranny, helping to awaken the divine spark dormant in humans. In contemporary practices of ceremonial magic, Azazel is often invoked as the guardian of portals between dimensions. His attributes include the ability to facilitate visionary experiences, revelations of hidden knowledge, and alchemical transformations of both matter and consciousness. Practitioners report that working with Azazel's energy often precipitates intense periods of learning and transformation, accompanied by significant synchronicities and revealing dreams. A particularly interesting aspect of modern interpretations is the distinction made between Azazel and Lucifer. While Lucifer, the light-bearer, is often associated with intellectual enlightenment, reason, and questioning established authorities, Azazel is linked to practical knowledge, manual arts, and the material manifestation of power. Together, they form a complementarity. Lucifer inspires the search for knowledge, while Azazel teaches how to apply it to transform reality. Esoteric researcher Michael Ford, in his work Luciferian Witchcraft, explores how Azazel represents the chthonic and earthly aspect of esoteric initiation, the need to get your hands dirty with concrete practices, not just abstract theories. Ford connects Azazel to the alchemical processes of coagulation and separation, where raw materials are transformed into substances of power. This interpretation resonates deeply with the original teachings attributed to Azazel in the Book of Enoch, the art of working metals and extracting essences from plants. Contemporary esoteric communities often interpret Azazel's imprisonment in the desert as a metaphor for the state of human consciousness. The desert represents the uninitiated mind, barren, desolate, seemingly empty. The initiatory process involves freeing Azazel from this prison, allowing transformative knowledge to flow again. In this interpretation, the initiate does not summon an external entity, but releases a potential already present in their own psyche. In contemporary shamanic and neo-syncretic traditions, Azazel is occasionally identified as a teacher spirit, an entity who guides initiates through altered states of consciousness to reveal hidden knowledge about plants, animals, and natural forces. This interpretation connects the ancient figure to modern concepts of non-human intelligences, who interact with shamans and mediums to facilitate healing and the expansion of consciousness. It is particularly fascinating how the figure of Azazel has evolved from a punished transgressor in monotheistic traditions to a celebrated liberator in modern esoteric circles. This transformation reflects fundamental changes in the human relationship with knowledge and authority. In an age where information and technology are supreme values, it's not surprising that a figure associated with the democratization of forbidden knowledge is reinterpreted in a more positive light. But this reinterpretation raises fundamental questions about the ethical limits of knowledge, questions that remain relevant even in our supposedly enlightened age. Azazel's moral judgment varies drastically depending on the philosophical perspective adopted. From the perspective of traditional monotheistic traditions, his transgression represents a break with the established divine order, a presumption that he, as a creature, could determine better than the Creator what knowledge humans should possess. This view emphasizes the importance of cosmic hierarchy and gradual development, where knowledge is revealed only when its recipients are prepared to use it responsibly. On the other hand, Promethean and emancipatory traditions celebrate Azazel as a liberator from imposed ignorance. The political philosopher Michael Bakunin, in God and the State, argued that the biblical figure of the serpent, often associated with Samael, which some texts identify as another name for Azazel, represented the eternal rebel, the first freethinker and emancipator of the worlds. This interpretation sees the imposition of limits on human knowledge as a control mechanism, not as benevolent protection. The tension between these visions reflects a permanent ethical dilemma in human civilization, the balance between knowledge and wisdom. Knowledge is the ability to do. Wisdom is the discernment to know what should or should not be done. Azazel passed on powerful knowledge, metallurgy, astronomy, botany. But did he prepare humanity to use this knowledge ethically? The text of Enoch suggests not, describing how this knowledge quickly led to violence, oppression, and degradation. This dilemma resonates deeply in our own era, where unprecedented technological advances are happening at a dizzying pace, often without corresponding ethical development. Artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, nanotechnology, surveillance technologies. We are like primitive humans receiving the forbidden knowledge of Azazel, possessing tools whose power exceeds our maturity to use them wisely. The warnings contained in the myth of Azazel seem extraordinarily relevant to our own contemporary dilemmas. Particularly intriguing is the moral ambiguity inherent in the specific knowledge imparted. Metallurgy makes it possible to forge weapons as well as agricultural tools. Cosmetics can express identity as well as manipulate through illusion. Incantations can heal as well as bewitch. Knowledge itself is not inherently moral or immoral. Its ethical value depends on the intention and context of its application. Perhaps Azazel's real transgression was not to impart knowledge, but to do so without simultaneously imparting the ethical maturity necessary for its responsible use. Hermetic and alchemical traditions offer a more nuanced interpretation of this issue. The alchemical principle, solve et coagula, dissolve and coagulate, suggests that all authentic development requires phases of destruction and reconstruction. Perhaps the chaos introduced by Azazel's teachings was a necessary stage in human evolution, a preliminary dissolution allowing for later reconstruction at a higher level. In this view, even apparent evil serves the greater good within a wider cosmic economy. The poet William Blake captured this ambiguity in his work The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, where he writes, "Without contraries there is no progression. Attraction and repulsion, reason and energy, love and hate are necessary to human existence." This dialectical vision suggests that figures like Azazel, transgressive yet transformative, are necessary to catalyze evolution, even if their methods seem destructive when seen from a limited perspective. Some scholars of mysticism propose that both Azazel's transgression and his subsequent punishment can be understood as parts of a wider cosmic plan. In this interpretation, even his rebellion was foreseen and incorporated into the larger divine economy, a necessary stage in the evolution of human consciousness. This view echoes the Kabbalistic concept of the breaking of the vessels, where an apparently catastrophic rupture is actually an integral part of the divine creative process. Perhaps the most profound aspect of this questioning lies in its personal and contemporary application. Each of us faces, on an individual scale, the same dilemma that Azazel represented cosmically. When we acquire knowledge or power, do we have a responsibility to consider its ethical implications before applying or sharing it? When we discover potentially disruptive truths, should we reveal them immediately or consider whether others are prepared to receive them? The myth of Azazel invites us to contemplate these questions not as philosophical abstractions, but as practical and urgent dilemmas. In the end, perhaps the hero-slash-villain dichotomy is inadequate for understanding complex figures like Azazel. In mature esoteric traditions, he is recognized as a necessary, albeit dangerous force, like fire, which can both heat and consume. His story invites us not to simplistic judgment, but to deep reflection on the paradoxes of knowledge, power, and responsibility. In a world where knowledge is expanding exponentially, the ancient story of this fallen angel offers a valuable lens through which we can contemplate our own relationship with the forbidden knowledges of our age. Perhaps the most profound lesson Azazel offers us is the need to balance knowledge with wisdom, power with responsibility, technological advancement with ethical maturity. As we continue our own search for knowledge that transforms reality, we are invited to reflect. Will we be more prudent than our mythological ancestors, or will we repeat on a new scale the same mistakes that required cosmic interventions? If you're interested in exploring more about spirituality, I've specially selected some videos full of profound knowledge and fascinating discoveries that you'll love. Just click on one of them. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to continue this journey of self-discovery and spiritual learning. Your commitment to knowledge is the first step towards transforming your reality.